All right. Take your Bibles before we go to prayer. Take your Bibles, turn to Micah. Micah chapter number 2. Micah chapter number 2. And we will have a look here. Micah chapter number 2. Verse 1 of Micah, chapter number 2 says this: Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it, because it is in the power of their hand. And they covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage. Therefore thus saith the Lord, Behold, against this family do I devise an evil from which ye shall not remove your necks, neither shall ye go haughtily, for this time is evil. In that day shall one take up a parable against you and lament with a doleful lamentation and say, We be utterly spoiled. He hath changed the portion of my people. How hath he removed it from me? Turning away, he hath divided our fields. Therefore thou shalt have none that shall cast a cord by lot in the congregation of the Lord. Prophesy ye not, say they to them that prophesy, and they shall not prophesy to them, that they shall not take shame. O thou that art named of the house of Jacob, is the Spirit of the Lord straitened? Are these his doings? Do not my words do good to him that walketh uprightly? Even of late my people is risen up as an enemy. Ye pull off the robe with the garment from them that pass by securely, as men averse from war. The women of my people have ye cast out from their pleasant houses. From their children have ye taken away my glory forever. Arise ye and depart, for this is not your rest. Because it is polluted, it shall destroy you, even with a sore destruction. If a man walketh in the Spirit, and falsehood do lie, saying, I will prophesy unto thee of wine and of strong drink, he shall even be the prophet of this people. I will surely assemble, O Jacob, all of thee. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together as the sheep of Bozrah, as the flock in the midst of their fold. They shall make great noise by reason of the multitude of men. The breaker is come up before them. They have broken up and have paused through the gate and are gone out by it. And their kings shall pass before them, and the Spirit and the Lord on the head of them. This sort of finishes, there's sort of 3 sermons of sorts that Micah gives, and each one begins with, hear ye people. It says in verse 2 of chapter number 1, and chapters 1 and 2 sort of are linked together. Chapter 3 begins with, Hear, I pray you, O heads of Jacob, and then those chapters are linked together. And then if you look at chapter number 6, Hear ye now what the Lord saith, and that 6 and 7 seem to be linked together as messages of the Lord. Any thoughts, verses here out of Micah chapter number 2? Ben? I don't know. I didn't actually look at that verse, to be honest. The breaker, because that word caught my attention when I read it, when I was reading through it. And I read through the whole entire book again today, and then I read this chapter a few times, and I was like, yeah, but I was actually looking somewhere else. But I don't know. I'm not sure. No. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And it could be. Yeah. Yeah, and Nebuchadnezzar and the Assyrians as well, because Israel is still in play here. So the Assyrians are actually Sennacherib come and destroy the northern kingdom, but both of them God says are his servants. Not necessarily about Sennacherib directly, but he uses them And Nebuchadnezzar is said to be the servant of God, even in his wickedness. Paul.
Verse 2, I think the Bible story, and they coveted fields,
Yes.
by violence, elders, and they take them away, so they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage.
Yeah.
Of course, you think of Nabal.
Yes.
And there was Ahab, and he just coveted this land, and the land was precious to him, and it really meant something to him more than, it just its actual monetary value, like he valued it because of his heritage was really special to him, and he coveted it, and he just took it in the most evil, horrible way.
Yep.
And it was
If you read that, that's in 1 Kings 21, which same thing. When I read that, you can't help but think of Naboth. I think if you know the Bible stories, and so I went back and read the story of Naboth and out of 1 Kings 21. Man, it's like this is like a summary of that exact same story, because even in that he goes and asks, it's a heritage. It's Naboth says, I can't do it. It's my inheritance. And then, which is what this is talking about a heritage. And then he says that they go to their beds and they conceive ways of doing evil and do it in the morning. Well, that's exactly what happens with Ahab. He goes to his bed and doesn't eat, and his wife comes in and says, oh, why are you so sick and why are you so... So it's like the whole story is sort of played out here. But the story of Ahab happened about 80 years or 80 to 100 years before Micah prophesying, which is interesting because if you remember last week, it says that the sins of Israel had come down into Judah, that they caused to enter in, those sins had come down, and it's that first the idolatry comes in, and then the sins of Israel come in. So their idolatry comes in first of all, and then the same behavior comes in after it, and now they're doing it as well. It's just like a repeat. The same things are happening to them. In chapter number 1, verse number 5, it says this. This is what chapter 1 is about. For the transgression of Jacob is all this, and for the sins of the house of Israel. What is the transgression of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? And what are the high places of Judah? Are they not Jerusalem? The primary sin in chapter number 1, meaning high places, it's the idols, right? It's idolatry. In chapter number 2, it deals with covetousness. And he's dealing with the covetousness of the people. Now, go back to, just in your minds, go back to Mount Sinai, and when God gave the law to Moses, there's 2 tablets, right? 2 tables of stone. One of them deals, they're 2 for a reason, remember? One deals with man's relationship before God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And then the second one has to do with man's responsibility before his fellow man. So covetousness and murder and those things are on this side, adultery. So it's almost like his first part of that preaching against their sin, first is, you've broken the commandments on the first tablet, on the first table with your idolatry and having other gods, and now he gets into their covetousness and deals with how they have broken the second table as well, in their covetousness, in their murderous way of stealing and their greed. And so he is preaching to them using the law of God and saying, you are guilty before God, you know the law, and you are breaking the law before God. And how was that received? It's in the chapter, how he was received. I don't know if you can spot that in the chapter. Have a look, glance through it, and see if you can find how was his preaching received. In chapter number 2. Sorry? Keep reading. Very close though. No, it's between those 2. Sorry, verse 6. Sorry, I'll just tell you. Verse 6. Yeah, prophesy ye not, say they to them that prophesy. That's the response that they're saying. Don't get into our business. Move on, preacher man. Yeah, don't tell us about our idolatry. Don't tell us about our covetousness. Don't tell us about stealing the heritages of other people and committing murder and shedding blood. Don't, just, you move on. If you want to preach something, preach about how God's going to bless us and give us bountiful crops so we can get drunk. Sort of, look at verse 11. If a man walking in the Spirit and falsehood do lie, and will prophesy unto thee of wine and of strong drink, he shall even be the prophet of this people. So he's saying, if someone gets up and starts saying, right, you have broken the first table of the commandments of God in your idolatry, you're now breaking the second commandments of covetousness and stealing and murder, and you're wrong before God and you're wrong before your fellow man, it means you're ultimately wrong before God again. He says, they don't accept that. Don't prophesy that. We don't want to hear about that. But if someone gets up and starts saying, oh, God has spoken to me, and they are lying, and they're saying the spirit of prophecy is upon me, and the spirit and falsehood, they're lying. It says if they're lying, but if they prophesy about wine and strong drink, they're like, yeah, this is good. You will be our prophet. We anoint you. This is what we want to hear in a prophet, about how wine and strong drink, about just the stuff of this life, and just prophesy that stuff unto us. That's what we want to hear. Micah, we don't want to hear the stuff about the law and breaking out and how we're wrong before God. Man, humanity is the same, is it not? It's like today. That's exactly today. Man, it's not that preachers and prophets and prophesying in the truest sense it's not that it's unpopular, because if you say what the people want to hear, you'll be popular. It's when you say, thus saith God, truly, that's when you start having an issue here. And it's the same. It's the same today as it ever was. And I think oftentimes people go, it's just harder today than it ever has been. Actually, it's just always been hard. It has. It's like, if we could just go back to the 80s, it was good back in the 80s. Or if you could just go back to the time when Israel was actually walking with God, and this whole nation of Israel, they had the law then, and the whole nation was circumcised, and they pledged, and they had the temple. Man, it would have been good to prophesy back then. It would have been good to be a prophet back then. Micah would tell you, no. No, it was difficult back then. And Amos would tell you, no, I was not popular back then. And it's the same today as it was then. And he says, they say to me, prophesy ye not. But to the ones that will just say, I have a word from God, and they speak falsehoods and prophesy about wine and whatever else their strong drink, yep, that's who I want. That's the prophet that I'll be pledging my allegiance to. And nothing changes. Nothing changes. Nothing new under the sun. Nothing new under the sun. And Micah there is preaching against their covetousness. And honestly, all the way through, if you go back to 1 Kings, you can see that in Ahab's day, which is very early on. You can see it here in Micah's day. And if you were to fast forward another 80 years, guess what? Jeremiah and Ezekiel are prophesying the exact same stuff. That you've turned away from God. There's covetousness, there is bloodshed, there is violence, there is adultery. And it's the same thing all the way through until God brings judgment, which is what these chapters are about. God is bringing judgment. God is bringing judgment. Then the rest of it starts to have an upswing as he says that there is deliverance and for them to trust in the Lord. But that's chapter number 2 of Micah, and we'll leave off there. Find a prayer partner tonight, and we will go to the Lord in prayer this evening. Bring those requests. Remember our missionaries, Brother